And we're live.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Lisa.
Hi, Josh. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's having a good Wednesday, and at least it's a little cooler than yesterday.
Yes.
So I might actually be able to string a full sentence together and be coherent.
And I might be able to as well. It's the heat has been intense. That has gone without saying the last couple of days. But welcome to Dark Ozarks. We thank you for joining us here on Facebook. And essentially, this is our live, long format, deep dive video podcast. That's a lot of words to put together.
Get used to it.
Do them about. And we have a really fun topic to deep dive on tonight.
Yes, we do. Shapeshifters, things that howl in the night. And some things that howl in the night that we end up talking about are not shapeshifters and, are misidentified things and various assorted events or just people being people. But we are talking about shapeshifters, and they've gotten a lot of good PR in the last few years.
They have, particularly in the form. So jumping in, before we talk about events, before we talk about our sponsor, which we will in a moment, always buying books, and then lots of great live events for folks who love the dark history and occult and paranormal realities of the Ozarks and beyond. Opportunities for folks to come meet us, share stories, etc. That's
giveaway.
Yes.
Stay tuned for information on the giveaway.
Yes. But increasingly, there's perhaps every generation, or now I think as information is moving more quickly, about every 10 years, we see the cryptid of the moment, or the monster of the week, so to speak. And of course, pop culture has always driven this in the 20th century and now in the 21st century. Pop culture predominantly in the form of film in the 20th century, and predominantly in the form of urban legend passed on via internet in the 21st century. And so, the term movie monster, certainly in the 20th century, popularized a handful of paranormal phenomena: your Dracula, your Mummy, your Frankenstein, your aquatic bipedal creature from the Black Lagoon,
werewolf,
yes, and indelibly imprinted an image into the minds of millions, but typically without a lot of further detail.
Right.
That all we really knew,
purely one-dimensional.
Yes, all we typically really knew, for example, about Dracula was that it was Bela Lugosi for a long time. And thematically, and of course I'm speaking as a fiction writer as well, my hat's off to the, at the time, laborious level of deep dive research that Irish novelist Bram Stoker did to write it's not the first vampire novel, but certainly the first to really reach that mainstream of public consciousness, to really just define what it meant to understand, for example, a vampire. And in the terms of shapeshifters, vampires are shapeshifters according to the lore. And we will get into some North American shapeshifting vampires tonight. The Sukiant comes to mind particularly.
Yeah.
And at this point, of course, the adjective vampiric has immediate connotations of feeding upon blood and the dark paranormal and things that go bump or things that howl in the night, etc. And are also associated with sort of that traditional, something that we see pretty consistently cross or pan culturally, of your traditional pantheon of dark animals, your wolves, your bats, your cats, your
Yeah.
lizards, your toads,
Mhm.
etc.
Very much so. And even man's best friend, in the form of a hellhound or a black hound.
Yes, your spectral black hound. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the spectral black hound is probably my favorite, personal favorite phenomena, especially in the fact that it is something that occurs both in the British Isles in particular, and then also in North America.
Yes, and actually, when we talk about hounds or stray into more the Germanic version and werewolf tales, well, and of course France, probably the most famous werewolf case was in France in the 1700s, but also in Asia.
Yes.
They had same tales of shape-shifting canines, in particular, and I guess it's easy to say, well, that's just a universal primal fear of wolves, but perhaps in times of famine, yes, but generally wolves stay away from men.
Right. I think there is, in terms of what I would classify as healthy analysis, I think your traditional yin yang approach, the balance, the consistent tension between light and dark is very helpful to apply in this situation, because and typically what we see is an imbalance in one direction or in the other.
Yeah.
An individual who, for example, experiences something that is difficult to define. It is very easy on one hand to rush to essentially debunk it and to imbalance heavily into the side of simply making broad assumptions that essentially your across the veil phenomena simply cannot exist. We're not even going to entertain it as existent. And so then the phenomena simply gets explained with you saw something perfectly normal and you were mistaken.
Right.
And certainly there is a place for that analysis. You and I have done that type of analysis and I would caution the viewers, the listeners, when you're, to remain as objective as possible, because it is not uncommon for individuals, and sometimes that individual is me, to want to experience something paranormal so much that you become hyper aware or hyper vigilant, and the mind is very powerful and is quite capable of interpolation, essentially taking fragments of data and then filling in a desired result around it. And before you know it, you're positive that you saw something and you didn't, or heard something, and it was very explainable. That said, there are, and you and I have had these experiences, and a lot of people we've talked to have had these experiences. The ones to me that are most credible are individuals who are not styling themselves as, I'm going to be a little rude, wannabe paranormal investigators, etc., but just individuals who are going about their daily lives, living their lives, doing their thing. They are not out to discover something or experience something, and yet it happens, and they are changed from that experience.
Yeah, those are the ones that are very compelling to me because, and often they're in the midst of something, their car breaks down, they're changing a tire or whatever, and then they see something and it's the last thing on their mind at the time. And so those kind of situations are always fascinating to me, and they happen. And it's easy to, I think one thing too, it's always easy with these kind of stories, especially in our sort of our little cocoon in the middle of the continent here. We tend to think, oh, those things don't happen here. Those kind of stories, they might happen on the coast here, but those are old world notions and this and that. But it's really not. There's a lot of lore that goes back with settlers as well as Native Americans. And we still get some accounts, as we go.
We do. We really do. Very, very unusual accounts presented by very credible witnesses who, in many cases, have no desire to be in the spotlight, but they are at times very relieved to have found individuals that they can actually share this with, because it's part of human nature. When you experience something unusual, you do want to share. And when that unusual phenomena, in which it has been experienced, it suddenly, puts one's job at risk, or that sort of thing, then it becomes very isolating and difficult. And in many cases, they retain that memory for years, just holding on to it.
And very vividly.
Yeah.
I guess, right, we ought to go ahead and put do our business at this point and make our announcements before we go on. I think first of all, let's talk about our giveaway that's going on. We are giving away free t-shirts from Always Buying Books, our sponsor.
Fantastic.
And to qualify, you have to like Dark Ozarks, you have to like Always Buying Books, and drop a comment on the video of your favorite book. It's real easy. And we'll be giving one away at the end of the month. And we're going to be doing that for several months. So
I wear an XL, just in case anybody wants to know. I wear an extra large, in case anybody wants to.
I think we can probably arrange for you to have a shirt anyway. Actually, yes, I do have your shirt still, because Bob gave me one for you. It's still sitting here. I forgot to bring it to you.
Oh, no worries. A huge thank you to our sponsor, Always Buying Books, with Bob and Elise in Joplin, Missouri. Always Buying Books. I finally this summer have had the opportunity to go to Always Buying Books. Highly recommend it. They have a great social media presence, website, Facebook page, and Facebook group, which is phenomenal. Regular, I would say, esoteric sales or opportunities to purchase books are on there regularly. Highly recommend following that. I already saw Bob posted some stuff this week that I was like, oh, that looks like a lot of fun. And then just stopping in, super easy to get to. Go to Always Buying Books on Facebook, and apply just enough critical thinking to be able to click on the address, and it'll get you there.
Yeah.
So
on North Main and in Joplin, if you're local, or talk to them. They will. You can pay for your books, and they will mail them to you if you're not local. So there's no reason not to enjoy the assorted inventory.
Well, and just the experience as a whole, and it's something that, of course, like everything else, so much is available online at the click of an algorithm. But there's something very special about developing real relationships with real people, and having the dialogue of saying, this is the type of thing I'm interested in, this is the type of thing that I'm looking for, and then continuing that dialogue to find the purchases, the in this case the volumes that are going to be the right choice to really fit into the library. It's a neat experience, and I have to say, of course, can't imagine why. I was very interested to check out the paranormal and the occult book section of Always My Books in person, and Bob did not disappoint. His curated choices of material is extremely interesting, varied, and just has layers of depth to it that is very impressive. And of course, in many cases, very affordable.
Yes. There's something there in every budget. In fact, they every day they have tables of books that are available just for your donation. You drop in money what you can afford, and for the books, and that money is donated to local nonprofits. So it goes for good causes too. So check it out.
And of course, I finally got to visit. Did get a stack of books, which I am in the process of reading through this summer. Actually, I don't know if I told you, you and Noah actually had the same response, which was, I'm surprised that you only bought that number of books.
Fair. Yeah, I was.
I was pacing myself, and well,
the good thing is you can go back.
I know, and I will. And then we have events coming up. We have September 17th, State of the Ozarks Fest in downtown Hollister. Dark Ozarks will be there. You and I will be there. And it is a great free street festival that I will hazard to say is unlike any street festival that you have attended in a very long time.
I will vouch for that, because I've been every year, and it's not like any of the others that I've been to. So it's very, very well done, and a varied representation of artisans, crafts, food, entertainment, something to be had by all.
Absolutely. It's a really...
On the 24th of September, we'll be in Caney, Kansas at the Border Town Paracon talking about something.
Yes,
and
possibly the Howler. I think I'm bringing my diagram.
Okay.
I like my diagram. Just have to find it. It's around here somewhere.
Well,
anyway.
Everyone is I have to deal with diagrams. So
yes.
But I tease. I like diagrams. But that'll be fun. And then October 15th, we'll be in Joplin for all-day event. Our Dark Ozarks October Country at the VFW Post 534 on just off Main Street, where we will cover all kinds of subjects relating to the Dark Ozarks. Then on the 20th of October, we will be at the, in conjunction with Third Thursday in Joplin, we will be doing the old Joplin downtown walking tour, covering history and ghost tales. And then on the 29th, we will be at the Ritchie Mansion in the Civil War Cemetery in Newtonian.
I'm excited about all of the events. I'm excited about getting over to Kansas, which I don't get the opportunity to do very often. And for people who might be wondering, Kansas, especially this portion, Southeast Kansas, is part of the extended borderlands that relate to the cultural and folkloric and historical history and realities of the Ozarks. So it does tie together all of these events. I'm super excited about. State of the Ozarks, of course, I'm most stressed about because I'm the event creator. And then in Newtonia, I am so excited to get back to Newtonia and
Yeah.
do this event. It's an incredible opportunity, and just a powerful night. Of course, we did this in April. That was one of my favorite nights of 2022.
Yep. Same.
Neat stuff. Also, I just realized I really want a t-shirt that says cryptids ? I have a flowchart for that.
Write that down.
I did.
Good. I like that too. Yeah, I think that goes on our list. But yes, go to paranormalsciencelab.com for your tickets for all the events. And there are limited spaces, particularly at Ritchie Mansion in particular. You will want to get your tickets because they are selling through already. So
yes.
Fantastic. Don't wait too long.
Fantastic. And a couple of quick sort of addendums. One, State of the Ozarks now has a Dark Ozarks landing page.
Yes.
And so if you're curious about all of the bits and pieces, because we do here on Dark Ozarks, we do a lot of stuff in a lot of places, both in person, and then you can find us on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram, in person. We have a variety of books that relate to all of this, etc. And so now, if you're like, where is it? Then you can simply go to State of the Ozarks, and immediately on the main menu, click on Dark Ozarks, and all available links, etc., are there. So really very functional, easy to get to hub page. And then also that's where we're going to be updating and providing additional resources as needed.
And of course we work closely with each other.
Yes. Yes.
With ourselves, so to speak.
I know. So basically, for people who might be wondering, you started Paranormal Science Lab a long number of years ago. I started State of the Ozarks 16 years ago. And then our collaboration together has created Dark Ozarks. And then it just all sort of layers in on itself, occasionally interacts with itself. So
it gets shuffled together in the deck.
It is. First Friday of October.
Yeah.
We will be Dark Ozarks / Paranormal Science Lab and State of the Ozarks. There, see, all went together. We'll be hosting a walking historic and paranormal haunted tour of downtown Hollister at the conclusion of the First Friday Art Walk, which is presented by State of the Ozarks.
Yes, and that's going to be fun.
It is going to be a lot of fun, possibly with period clothing. I think period dress. I think that's probably.
I think that's pretty much a definite.
I think so too. So of course we do encourage if you have period clothing from the 19th century that you'd like to show up in, you'll fit right in.
Yes. So Shapeshifters.
Yes. Okay. Here's a sort of a confluence jumping off point of discussion that I want to throw out here.
Okay.
And of course, we do encourage people to follow us on YouTube. We do a short initial conversations about this where we cover a little bit of different material as well on YouTube Live at 7 p.m. Then we come over here on Facebook, and then it all ends up on there. It is what it is. But we were talking about Wendigos and Skinwalkers.
Yes.
And there are distinct differences, what I would classify as socio-cultural differences between Wendigos and Skinwalkers as a simple parsing out reality. I think that Wendigos in some cases are a little harder to land upon outside of really dark times, creating dark fiction to help people understand what it was that they survived. In this case, winter famine.
Yeah, I think so. And for anyone that's not familiar, I always find it interesting because the Wendigo was the more prominent of the two for a very long time, as far as in lore and even pop culture.
Mhm.
And it comes from the Great Lakes area generally.
Yeah.
But it's basically, as you said earlier, a ghoul that was once human.
Yes. But
That
is no longer.
Right, it's been turned into a ghoul basically because it's resorted to cannibalism. Usually is the trigger.
Yes. And I think that in this particular case, I'm and we'll talk about some very interesting anecdotal stories that contradict what I'm about to say. Uh, but I think that in the case of the Wendigo, it is more reasonable that, much like um, the Black Plague of the mid 1300s in Europe, and a variety of famines that affected continental Europe during the Dark Ages and early Renaissance period, that these times of just unimaginable suffering and death
Mm-hmm.
taking place on a wide scale, really occurring on a people, on people groups, in this case European people groups, that had essentially become modernized modernized enough to produce enough city sewage to poison themselves, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
but not modern enough to understand the disease mechanisms associated with it.
Right.
That it becomes, these really dark and ghoulish stories become ways to explain the unexplainable, the inexplicable, the I can't believe this disaster or this tragedy has befallen so many people. The idea that you have, wandering children, that everyone in their family is dead from
Mm-hmm.
for example, famine or from plague. Individual, stories of parents eating their children because they were that desperate for food, and then trying to take this unimaginable suffering and frame it in a way that was understandable, and you
Mm-hmm.
get these really horrific folkloric tales out of that as a result. And then at the end of that, on the final end of that, it makes its way into modern urban lore, and folklore, and takes on a life of its own. And then we begin to start treating these stories as though they're cryptids, as though they're possibly real creatures. It seems certainly very reasonable in the case of the Wendigo or Wendigo to that this began with really something that's very difficult for us to wrap our heads around today at this point in North America, and that's very fortunate, but a level of winter famine
Mm-hmm.
that is causing individuals to begin cannibalizing their family members.
Right, and I think, and you've got two different examples there that, and most people may not realize that fairy tales that we grew up with, like Little Red Riding Hood, Hansel and Gretel, those came out of the Great Famine of the 1340s, and it was much worse than, I mean, we talk about the potato famine in Ireland in the 1840s and how bad it was, people starving, but it was not to the, I mean, and not slighting what happened there by any means, but it was not as dire as the Great Famine of the 1300s, because they really did resort to cannibalism in a number of places, and there were corollaries in the New World. And the difference is we ended up, the folk tales that we ended up with from Europe were still pretty human based, or with Little Red Riding Hood, you had the wolf, um, but he technically was not a shapeshifter or anything like that, or turned into a ghoul. Whereas with the Wendigo, this is the result of those parents who ate their children. In Europe, we hear about Hansel and Gretel and so on and so forth, but we don't hear about the parents who basically sent them out into the forest.
Yeah.
And then, but the Wendigo is basically the tale of what happens to those, basically family members, etc., when they resort to those means, and they are turned into a ghoul that's no longer human. But the one similarity I think that makes people think maybe it's the same thing as the Skinwalkers, it's often depicted with deer horns and so forth.
Yes, which there's some interesting bits and pieces. Of course, there's the it reminds me of the Snoffus.
Yeah.
It's a blood. The Windigo is a bloodthirsty Ozarkian Snoffus. But certainly the motif of a 7 or 8 foot tall, cannibalistic, emaciated, half human, half deer with claws and immense strength hunting in the night for human flesh is ridiculously terrifying.
Well, I guess, and in that, as you describe that out, it does make you think of the wolf Riding
Yes.
Hood, or the big bad wolf with the 3 little pigs too.
Right.
And
I think
serve the same purpose.
Yes, I think that something that I really like, and I think is particularly interesting, people oftentimes miss that the adult, mature bucks, whitetails, under certain circumstances can be pretty intimidating animals. Of course, elk are extremely intimidating, and certainly since the the film Bambi, we only see deer within the framework of the animals that are preyed upon.
Right.
And the idea that certainly a number of traditional North American cultures saw buck deer and elk very differently, that these were animals that were dangerous, mm-hmm. and were to be respected. In the case of their quote unquote transformation, shift into the folkloric Wendigo, is that they're terrifying. And I think that's an interesting shift.
It is, but by the same token, in British lore, the stag served the same purpose. It's just ultimately, for the most part, they were wiped out in the old world.
Yes. Now, I want to come back to the shifting Wendigo here in a moment. There are a number. You and I have reviewed a handful of tales, mm-hmm. associated with the Wendigo that, interestingly enough, is described as a Wendigo, but is called a Skinwalker in many cases, which is technically not accurate.
Right. They do get confused in the popular mind, in yeah. Pop culture.
In pop culture, yes. But that there's certain behavioral characteristics that, to me, and I'm curious to talk about with you as well, that mm-hmm. that really resonated in terms of I suppose a paranormal shifters type experience. Mm-hmm. Jumping real quickly, for people who are like, why are you talking about a folkloric creature from New England, or the northeastern part of the United States and Canada, is that the Ozarks, and want to tie this back here, but the Ozarks from a topographical and fauna and flora perspective are very uniquely positioned, something that you really don't run into outside of the Ozark Plateau, is the proliferation of eastern hardwood forest, your white oak, your maple, in particular, etc. But here in the Ozarks, whereas so it's there are elements, natural elements in the Ozarks that you're going to find in your forest, identical. It's the same tree species and the same types of growing patterns of dense hardwood forest that stretch from the Ozarks into, in particular, southern Indiana, in northern Kentucky, on up into Appalachia and New England. So there's that similarity. Now, what is also interesting is that something that has its fingers into the Ozarks is naturalistic features and flora, in particular, your plant life and tree species that are associated with the North American Southwest.
Yeah, that's true.
And particularly in terms of glades. And
yeah,
there's a number of plant species, prickly pear, and also animal species. Prickly pear and tarantula are very common in the Ozarks. It really freaks people out when they're not accustomed to that. Yes, we have cactus and we have giant spiders. I personally think the very large Ozarkian tarantulas are actually pretty cute. And in September, they tend to come out and like wander around on the road. And I think they're kind of adorable, but that's just me. But we have plant and animal species that are directly associated with the Southwest, with the desert portions of America. And that brings it. So to me, the Ozarks are a hub, a naturally existing hub, or, the center of the wheel of these two extreme regions. You certainly do not associate the very wet, moist, deciduous, heavily forested regions of New England with Arizona and New Mexico and the Great Deserts. In the Ozarks, you have both. Now, it also goes the other direction, because we also have the tall grass prairies they're coming in from Kansas and Nebraska. And you also have swamp and bog and delta of the traditional Deep South, along with some cypress in certain regions. So
that's true.
The Ozarks are so unique in the fact that not that you can't find various features elsewhere, but it's very difficult to find all of the features within immediate proximity, and you can do that here. I think
that's true.
It stands to reason that folklorically and possibly from a paranormal / cryptid perspective, we may see a similar layering of lore and experience in the Ozarks that you might not find elsewhere, and I think that's particularly interesting.
Well, that's true. And then if you layer on top of that, I mean, you mentioned elk earlier. I mean, at one point, elk were indigenous to the Missouri Ozarks, but not for quite a long time now. From hunting, not extinction. But another thing to think about is that the Native American groups that were here pre-Osage, pre-Cherokee, the Caddo tribes, and there were about 60 of them. They were spread out over a very large area, and they traded all the way in the Southwest into the Great Lakes. We have all of that documented, so that they had interaction with these various tribes. So the people from the Southwest that had Skinwalker tales, the people from the Great Lakes region that had Wendigo tales, they interacted. And so it's very likely that these stories were passed to the Ozarks and passed through here over probably a very long period of time.
Yes, I think that's very fair. Of course, coming back to the Ozarks Borderlands, which I think is, when you overlay what we think of as borderlands, which is, I would say, approximately 80 to 100 miles outside of the Ozarks Plateau.
Mm-hmm.
When you overlay that and do a comparison between essentially these ancient Mississippian mound builder cultures that, as you said, had established trade routes and a civilization, a pre-Columbian civilization that easily, simply in terms of culture itself, stretched from the Ohio River Valley to here in the Ozarks, into Oklahoma, down into modern day Mississippi and Louisiana. And then shared structural and cultural, or I suppose architectural and religious motifs with Central American, your Mexican cultures, like the Aztecs and even the Mayans and the Yucatan, that that our borderlands look even really small in terms of reaching outside of what was going on here in the Ozarks. Come to mind, Cahokia and the Cahokia Mounds are a dominant mound city that had these types of cultural sharing along with trade routes, and of course Oklahoma does as well.
Yeah, Spiro Mounds. And for people who think, oh, that's all there was, actually there were hundreds of mounds, probably thousands. That most of them have been taken down. I mean, we've covered several in various contexts that were up by Lake of the Ozarks originally, up by Stockton. We've actually, researched area down the Joplin area that, they had a mound. There was a mound,
Yes.
And that's been excavated at this point. So it's easy to say, oh, you have Cahokia, you have Spiro, that's all there was. But it was, think of the Silk Road, and stopping along 3,000, 5,000 miles or whatever it was, it's pretty much the same thing. And they had all of these interactions and trade routes. And so you have people who, had tales of Wendigo and, basically dogman tales up in that region too, etc., coming down and then interacting here and with people from the Southwest with Skinwalkers, etc. That it's not surprising that some of this lore does come up in the Ozarks, although it does tend to get labeled more generically, either as werewolf or just a canine type creature. But we don't have our own. We don't have a particular cool name and unique motif per se, but it's an
right. Where it's less less franchised.
Less franchised, yes. Aside from the howler, which we're not getting into today.
Right. We've given the howler enough of its due. Now, talking about the Southwest and the Southwest traditions, turning our attention to predominantly the Navajo, which is the largely the origin of the Skinwalker. Skinwalkers being vastly different than the Wendigo. Skinwalkers are shamans who have, through magical practice, quote unquote, been able to essentially cross the veil, I suppose, and can transform themselves into an animal that is essentially walking the veil. And it is an animal that, when seen, has recognizable animal features, but doesn't act or move like anything that we're accustomed to.
Right. You tend to get, a deer head or something that's canine, often emaciated, also emaciated like a Wendigo, but and long limbs, claws, etc. Often the shaman will be wearing animal fur skins. And the irony here is that that the Skinwalkers did not start out as a scary thing. Originally, it was just
or at least
shaman practice.
I want to throw this in, at least, at the very least, that much like a lot of hoodoo practice, that it's simply a practice that can be used in any direction. It's not inherently evil.
Right. But with in that culture, with the Skinwalkers, they view it that it becomes bad when they start using those powers for their personal gain and not to benefit the community.
Yes.
And sort of the general consensus now is that anyone that practices it is doing it for personal gain, that basically the sort of the old, more pure form is gone. No one's doing that now.
And there's a couple of interesting aspects. One aspect, which of course we are potentially transgressing by our discussion, is that it's a bit like Fight Club. The one rule about Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club. The rule about Skinwalkers is you don't talk about them for fear that you will attract their attention energetically.
Well, that's true. And there are those whisper tales about the Wendigo as well, and other creatures as well, both from the European background as well as Native American, the little people, etc. So, but those who do talk about it, basically will say that, basically everyone who does it now is bad, basically.
Yes. And there is the aspect, of course, this was a currently anonymous but recently collected anecdotal research for Paranormal Science Lab, that that certain shamans have chosen to essentially go dark and then start schools that essentially saying, let's create as many Skinwalkers as we possibly can. I find that really interesting because it is a contemporary report, and it's something, it's information that's not on the radar, so to speak. It's not at the ranch, Skinwalker Ranch. And I want to talk about that phenomenon for a moment, because you and I have similar experiences elsewhere. But is certainly from a socio-cultural standpoint, this situation of sort of the upheaval or the breakdown of society, in this case a very, very traditional and ancient society, and that it has become unbalanced. The idea that once you lose balance, that there's the situation where it can essentially go poisonous. It reminds me of this is not something I know a lot about, but I did watch Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, anyway, Michelle Yeoh, and the film. And I was very fascinated by the Kung Fu concept of the poison dragon. The idea that when there is an imbalance in the training, that individuals, essentially your shaman, magicians, someone can go toxic, essentially, and form, for example, their own school with the abilities but not the tradition, the respect and tradition and the balance of the past to help keep it within on track within a healthy structure. And for folks who are familiar with that film, I think that there's certainly, that's the closest cultural reference that I have.
And of course, the pop culture reference would be Star Wars.
Absolutely. The Sith. The Sith and the Jedi. And I don't know why I didn't do that. I had Star Wars posters all over my house. And the action figures, just in case anybody wondered about my nerd certification. But it's all there. It's all there. That's it. And the Imperial Shovel from 1983 with retractable plank. Anyway, but I think that is, what the conversation that seems to inspire is that there are secret shamanic practices that, when they're within balance within a society or a community, or that particular society and community, you probably would never even know that it occurred. It's
right.
It's used for precise things. Also, certainly many people's that we've talked to, interacted with, when they are talking about this type of phenomena, they are not talking about it in poetic or theoretical terms.
No, it's not theory. It's something real, something empirical, something that happened to them.
Yes, and I think that is an important distinction. Many times, and I think even we as somewhat objective research investigators can approach these things as saying, well, this is part of the lore, or this is this is a historic myth, or this is, for example, a little more on the Wendigo side, which I'll still contradict myself in a moment, but this is terrible famine resulted in these terrible stories, and the stories took on a life of their own over time. Those types of things. When we're talking about Skinwalkers and Navajo tradition, these, the information that we gather, the stories that we have, and some of the experiences that we've documented, we have moved beyond the realm of theory, and we're talking about individuals who are saying these are human beings who, through shamanic and magical practice, turn themselves into essentially an animal that is like many things, but is most like a skinwalker. And these creatures, temporarily, before they change back, have a number of documentable attributes. The capacity to move at an incredibly high rate of speed. The fact that they appear unnatural.
And a natural strength as well.
Yes. A sense of out of placeness or wrongness that seems to be associated with observing. The idea of seeing an animal and you go, for example, that looks like a coyote, but then something is off about it. Right. Or that the animal is looking at you in not, and oftentimes described, looking at you as though it's human.
Yes.
And I personally find that to be one of the most unsettling aspects of the anecdotally collected information.
Yes, and candidly, one of those experiences is my own.
Yes. And that I think is very important, because we're accustomed to interacting with animals and having animals behave in certain ways that we recognize. It's a lot like facial recognition for human beings. We the
We
fact,
read
and
its emotions. Mhm.
yes, and we also, as an artist, the hardest thing that you can draw is a face,
Mhm.
because human recognition patterns on a subconscious level analyze human faces more than anything else.
Yeah.
And so as an artist, if you're drawing a face, anything out of place, the brain will recognize, even though you couldn't necessarily tell you what's wrong with, the nose or the eyes or the mouth or the shape of the head, but the brain instantly recognizes and can pick that out. In the same way, we intuitively understand a mammal or non-human mammal behavior, the way that an animal would look at you or interact with you, etc. And so there is something deeply unnerving
Mhm.
about an animal that is acting human.
There is, and I guess just as a qualifier too, and we've covered this in other uh, episodes, but this is similar in some ways to Cherokee uh, lore on witchcraft, on witches.
Yes,
So, so you would have shifters who are witches, and certainly through the Ozarks. But as far as that unnaturalness and so on and so forth, it's the exact same thing as the lore from Europe for werewolves and vampires.
interesting. Yes. Which then brings up the obvious question associated with all of this: mythic or folkloric legend aside, when you have so many disparate cultures essentially reporting the same types of things associated with the same types of shamanic or magic, or in most cases in this regard, in all reality, things that are defined as black magic behavior, is it all myth or is it actually happening? And I tend toward the it is actually happening.
Something that usually there's something there when you have that many different groups saying the same thing, and not only those groups but also in Asia too. There are shifter lore, particularly canine, that are exactly the same patterns,
Yes.
and descriptions of unnaturalness and human intelligence and cunning and things like that. Even killing for sport, things like that that typically the animal would not do.
Yes. Speaking of that, and this is completely, well, it's not a complete left turn. It'll turn into left field on this, but close family member of mine mentioned to me several years ago they had uncovered a fox den in the in the barn,
Uh-huh.
and something that was known, and I love foxes, but something that was particularly notable that my family member referenced was they couldn't help but notice that the foxes had been collecting skulls.
Interesting.
Not skeletons, but specifically skulls of other animals, and placing them in what appeared to be collections.
Now, of course, you would expect that maybe from a crow or something, because that's typical behavior of theirs. But I've never heard of a canid doing that.
I had not either, so I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Interesting.
The world of weird is a lot larger than we like to think that it is, and certainly
Mhm.
once you get past the sort of the child's book of North American wildlife, things can really go off the rails in reality. It
They can.
also it also reminds me, one of my very early memories. Of course, bear in mind, my the sister and I in our childhood, actually not just in our childhood, collect artifacts from the forest. Sometimes to our mom's chagrin at the time.
I never did that. No.
Wide variety of rocks, fossils, tree branches, lichens, lots of Spanish moss. Really had a field day with my grandfather's location in Florida, because I was constantly dragging off chunks of palm frond and large seed clusters of palmetto and anything that I could find along those lines. But I have a very distinct memory, and I'm only tying this in because of the Wendigo, very distinct memory of my sister coming to me and saying, "Oh my gosh, you got to come with me and see what I found." And we go out into the timber. It's cold, it's rainy, it's very, very early spring in Illinois. And this was not easily facilitated trek. We go out to the timber, go down into the ravine, crawl up the other side, and then there's a massive blackberry bramble that we as kids are no longer following the deer trails. We're now following rabbit trails, which means we're crawling under the gooseberry and the blackberry, and then at the edge of the opposing side of the ravine, underneath that, my sister had found a deer skeleton.
Oh,
and we took the head and took it home, and but one of us may still have it. I think she does.
Those things still go on in my family. So
yeah.
And there's an animal skull sitting in the yard. So
and on a childhood and some perhaps primal level, there was just something very powerful and evocative about that experience. I remember it perfectly.
Well, I mean, it's in a very real sense, it's a talisman, and all kinds of cultures around the world have for thousands of years have used masks and skulls and effigies of animals that they respected in ceremony as a way to seek the power of that animal. And so the fact that skinwalkers often will don, furs or even skulls, goes along with that. And so the fact that the Wendigo as a ghoul takes on the appearance of a deer's head and so forth, is not too surprising, really.
It's not. Now, this also brings up an interesting reference point between, in this case, the shamanic tradition of Skinwalker and the Nordic berserker, or that. And I find this interesting because, of course, fortunately, with the information that is hesitantly percolating in regards to the Skinwalker is the reality that individual, in this case, the presumptively Black shamans are transforming.
Right.
Now, when you are dealing with what I would classify as juicy but relatively scant documentable information from Scandinavia in the early modern era about the past of berserkers, there's a long laundry list of why these particular Nordic or Norse warriors were hallucinating, dressing themselves in bearskins, all sorts of very, it was the mushrooms they ate, it was the outfits that they wore, it was the ritual cult that they were in, etc., which is all very understandable. But it doesn't take into the possibility, it refuses to look at the possibility that they may have been shaman warriors who were turning themselves into what we would call as skinwalkers, but instead of coyotes, for example, that was bears.
Exactly. I mean, I think the mechanism and the purpose could be very, be similar, and certainly the accounts of berserkers, it would be, particularly going back compared to skinwalkers, their original purposes, which was often to have an advantage in battle and so forth. So there could very well be a parallel there.
It would be, of course, much of the skinwalker lore that we're seeing, again, being hesitantly shared out of the Southwest, and there are tie-ins to the Ozarks, we'll get to those in a moment, have associations with death omens, curses, and or simply individuals traversing unnatural distances, say like 200 miles overnight.
Right.
Those types of things. But for example, we see that as the idea of, perhaps a psychological warfare, single vendettas against an individual, a family, that sort of thing. But just, and I really, this was not part of my notes tonight, but just taking that heightened impossibility for the rational mind, replacing coyote with bear, and then multiplying that times 20 to 50 to 100 men, and then weaponizing it as essentially a battalion.
Right. Well, and even skinwalkers originally, they say would go in groups. So originally, now they're more solitary, but originally there would be a small group, maybe 5 or 8 or something. But so really, I mean, it's very similar, but just perhaps not as many in numbers, the berserkers.
The idea of just how genuinely terrifying that would have been. And potentially something far outside of, these were hallucinating warriors wrapped in bearskins.
Right. And I always find, we found this in a lot of subjects, these parallels in different places that you wouldn't think that there would be that much of a parallel, but which says to me there's something in the practice that must have value.
I tend that way as well. And something that I find interesting as a counterpoint to this, there's in pop culture, granted you have your monster of the week themes, but another recurrent theme that I see is identify lore about ancient culture A, and then retranslate it with the poor superstitious saps who are there. See, for example, the scary warriors dressed in bearskins, and they think that they're supernatural, but of course the end result is, guess what? Spoiler alert, they're just people.
Right.
And it's one of the reasons I think I find a lot of appeal with the I think the German/Scandinavian film Trolls, the idea that they go out looking for trolls, and yes, the trolls are real and they are killing you. It's it's not like we pull back the curtain and find out that it was just the fog on the rocks. No, it's real phenomena, and they're out to get you, and you're not going to survive. I find that particularly interesting in terms that in some situations you get away from the established norms of society, you start finding things like that, and it is unsettling to our expectation.
Mhm. Now, this is a complete aside, but ironically, a corollary where people are more willing to accept that, yes, it is that something beyond just the people in a costume or whatever, is voodoo.
Yes.
It's ironic that for whatever reason in our culture at
Hmm.
this point, we say, no, that can't happen. Berserkers can't happen. Skinwalkers can't happen. But voodoo priests and priestesses, yeah, that's something people often on a very primal level are very afraid of their abilities.
Yeah.
Um,
Very, very quickly.
but in a very fundamental way, we are talking about the same things,
We
just
are.
a little different methods.
Yes, we are. And this is also a good opportunity. Excellent segue. I want to talk about Dark Ozarks subscriptions for just a moment.
Okay.
Because this is something new. Facebook has offered it to Dark Ozarks, largely in thanks to all of our followers.
Yeah.
And so it is a next step in this entire social media process. It's certainly new to us, but it is a Facebook option that functions much like Patreon with exclusive information. So occasionally Facebook is like putting things up on this. I don't quite get it because I'm one of our content creators on this process. So how does the subscription aspect work?
Well, basically, it does work a lot like Patreon. People would be more familiar with it from Patreon. That basically you can subscribe. It's a $4.99 a month fee. You get exclusive content as well as options over time for more one-on-one interaction with us, that kind of thing. And the subscriptions help support creating more content. So
Yes.
the more subscribers, the more that we can bring to you. And some people would say, well, why would I pay for something I get for free? Well, it's not exactly this, it's not the same content.
No.
And it's a way of bringing more content that you are interested in to you, because it helps us be able to do that.
It does. And it's something we've been having a lot of fun with pretty much, even though we both have day jobs. This is seriously like one of the most fun things that we get to do is this type of research and investigation and then sharing it. And we have started a series of both essentially paranormal occult and then dark history / largely war history in the Ozarks, where we will take a single subject and deep dive on it for about 12 to 15 minutes. So it's very short, easily digestible chunks, and those are available exclusively on the subscriber platform. So we do encourage people to check that out, consider it. And I think Facebook's running some sort of deal in terms of
actually you can do a trial, sign up for it, and you can then cancel if you decide you don't want it. So you can try it for free. I think I think it's 60 days free. So even if you aren't sure you want to do it, you can give it a shot.
Yeah. And what made me think of that, I've been thinking, oh, we should talk about that, because even I'm still trying to wrap my head around the dynamic of the whole thing. Outside of the content creation is the fun part. But this something where we upload content to the subscriber side every week. And just as a teaser, we're going to do a deep dive on hoodoo later tonight, and then that will be available shortly. So we do encourage people to check that out and give us feedback if there's topics that you would like us to do basically a 15-minute deep dive on. Let us know, and we'll get on it as we can. So talking about shifting back to the Skinwalkers, the reality of the Skinwalkers, there are, and then tying all of this back directly to the Ozarks.
Okay.
There are a lot of individuals' experiences in the Ozarks that tie in with essentially Skinwalker phenomena.
There are, as well as other shifter phenomena.
Yes.
There are, and I'm always kind of surprised when those things come up, but they do more often than you think. And to be perfectly honest, to me, it's like when we talk. It's like when we talk about the paranormal, and people say, "Well, why is a ghost haunting this house or whatever?"
Yes.
Are you stuck in this house? It's like, no, they're not stuck to the four walls. And I kind of view this phenomenon the same way. That it could be you could have something that basically has been created here or somewhere else and is traveling through. And I think that sometimes we get so stuck in, I saw this at this spot on the road. Why would this be there? And it could just be caught it in the midst of going somewhere.
Right. I think that's an interesting, that's important to take into consideration. Of course, we are dealing with shifter information that strongly associates the benefit of being a shifter with traveling long distances at great speed.
Exactly. And that seems to be one of the original purposes. And so it would make sense that could happen. And so many of the roads through the Ozarks, again, we don't necessarily think about, but they go back thousands of years and are traces, and have been used by people for literally thousands of years. So if you do something that has that supernatural ability, traveling those roads in a way makes sense.
It does. It really does. Now, so for example, a credible witness that I talked to probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, traveling a highway in Oklahoma, and a elongated coyote-like animal is essentially crosses in immediate proximity to the vehicle and then runs and keeps up with the vehicle for a short period of time before veering off away from the road at night.
And I've heard several of those kind of stories through Oklahoma and Missouri. None in Arkansas that I can think of offhand, but not precluding it. That they usually go something along that lines, is that they think that it's something that seems canine in some way, but not in a way that they are familiar with. Not a wolf, not a coyote, and not a domestic dog.
Right. And behaving in a way that cannot fit a natural animal pattern.
Right. Either, moving too fast, or the way it moves, that kind of thing. Or getting up and starting to go bipedal.
I was gonna say, yes, standing up on its hind legs and running off like a human.
Yes.
Admittedly unsettling.
Yes, and we've had a couple of those brought to us, recently. So, and it, it's always easy to say, oh, the person, they must have been tired or sleepy, they hallucinated, they, just imagined it, or, are they crazy or whatever. But the thing of it is that usually it's like you say, this person's driving and, they're not thinking about something like this as they're driving down the road in Oklahoma.
No.
And my experience too is that I don't really know anyone that's brought that kind of story to me or to us that's tried to profit from it or get notoriety.
No, I
So,
don't.
that says something to me too, where you flip back to the Skinwalker Ranch, that's exactly what they've done. I
Yes.
mean, I'm not making any conclusion as to what's there, but it's pretty much grown up to the point that it's, pick your poison, and it's there. There's skinwalkers, there's various apparitions, there's stories of UFOs there, and it's like, what's next? Uh, and a lot of hype, and so I'm not saying that it's untrue by any means. I don't know. I haven't been there, but it always makes me wonder when suddenly it pops on the radar, and
Yes.
you have the whole, kit and caboodle going on at once, and sort of the, hey, look at us, and
Hmm.
I don't know.
I don't either. It's difficult to say. And of course, once in any of these situations, once that you get a highly commercialized IP involved, it's very difficult to parse out uh, uh, reality. That's
Very true. I mean, I know situations of locations with paranormal activity that have grown up into this pop culture juggernaut, and what traditionally has gone on there, and people who've been there say is one thing, but then the hype is something else. But just because it was hype doesn't mean there was nothing there to begin with. So
and I think that
I'm not saying that
right.
that either. So
No, there's layers of potentiality. Um, Something that I think is an interesting crossover, and again, tying similar phenomena back to the Ozarks. You and I have done preliminary investigation, and I'd like to continue on a location near Joplin
mm-hmm.
that is a ranch.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sizable number of acres. And even just in terms of first impressions and collecting the family's experiences, you're sitting there going, okay, what isn't here?
Yeah, that's, I mean, that's fair, but by the same token, there's a lot of things that kind of add up there, that we can't really go into, that and say, okay, this in the past, this makes sense, this makes sense, and this makes sense. So sometimes you can have sort of that nexus, that it comes together, that it's plausible. But again, this is, the place we're talking about is not, trying to market itself either.
No. The other location that immediately comes to mind is the immediate region of Spooklight Road.
Yeah.
And that, there's been so many disparate elements of paranormal activity, of, again, disparate, very seemingly disassociated bits and pieces. The short list, besides the spooklight itself, includes phantom coyotes.
Yeah.
It includes more traditional paranormal activity. It includes shadow men. That includes phantom sounds in addition to coyotes. And it's not impossible to begin to associate more traditional shamanic conjuring level veil thinning, essentially, with some of these locations.
And I think that's definitely possible, especially in some of these places that we don't really know the history as to whether, was there ceremonial land there, or
Mhm.
things like that, which in the case of Spooklight Road, we do know that there was very close by.
Yes.
So, uh, and in the context of the long-term story of that area, um, everything does kind of make sense. I mean, even if you don't have a direct explanation, it ultimately doesn't come across as showmanship or anything like that per se.
No, no. And I mean, outside of Spookies, which is no longer open,
Right.
there's never been a commercialization of Spooklight.
Right. And that basically was, just taking advantage of the fact that you had dozens or hundreds of people out there every weekend, and hey, come buy some pop and candy, and here's a map.
Exactly. Mm, very down home,
Mm-hmm.
non-franchisable response that
Exactly.
honestly I think is quite wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just sad that I missed that era, because I would have loved to have gone in there. That
Yeah, I remember the building when it was still there falling down, but I was never actually in it. That was before my time.
it so along with this, early this year, you experienced a very unique occurrence.
I did. And I can't say per se that it was a shifter, but that was the sense I had in the end. And again, I was not looking for an experience at the moment. I was driving down the road and coming to the crest of a hill and getting ready to turn. And as I slow to turn, um, the hill goes on down into the valley, and there's a creek there and a low water bridge. And this animal leaps out from my right side of the road, and it drops away from the road there. You know the spot. It drops away. So for to jump into the middle of the road, I mean, that the distance is hard to imagine, a regular, a coyote or something doing, which is the first thing that caught my attention, because it's like the behavior didn't make sense. And
Mhm,
it was too big to be a coyote.
mhm.
Uh, the shape of the body was heavier, but not really like a wolf either. And the tail was extremely long. Um, and the head did not look like a coyote or a wolf's head, but you couldn't quite place it. And it stopped, and it literally stood there and stared at me.
Mhm.
And in a way that, was not hesitant or afraid or wondering if it should run. It was ter- territorial, but not in an aggressive place, aggressive way. It was like, this is my spot, and I'm just almost like, whether you're here or not, is I don't care.
Yeah.
Um, and then after a number of seconds, it then took a standing jump off the road into the riverbed, which again would be further than a normal dog of any kind could have done.
Yes.
And I was just left going, wow. But the way it looked at me, it felt like it knew I was there. It was
Mhm.
aware of me, and not in the sense that an animal does.
Yes.
It,
So
it, it did leave me, I wasn't shaken, but it's certainly an impression. I mean, I think we
yes,
talked that night about it.
we did. We did. And from this point on, I'm just going to refer to it as the French Point Monster.
There you go.
um, it it does bring into question. You mentioned shifters, or particularly skinwalkers, traveling long distances. Do you just and of course we don't know, but in terms of impressions, and you are very familiar with the immediate region.
Mm-hmm.
Is your impression one that this particular being
Mm-hmm.
is denned up somewhere in the area, or that it was just passing through?
Well, there have been other occasions in the area of things that didn't quite make sense that have been experienced. So it may be end up more local than
Yes.
you think.
And the other thing that is an interesting thing to conjecture. This particular phenomena in terms of shamanic magic seems to be associated with passing through the veil.
Mm-hmm.
It does bring up the question, is the den in the veil?
On this side or the other side? That's a good question.
Obviously, I don't know the answer to that, but it's something to consider. What would be your definition or your differentiation between Skinwalker and Shifter?
Well, a Skinwalker is a type of shifter
Yes.
that, by definition, starts out as human.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's different lore that there can be shifters that start as animals and then shift into other things.
Yeah.
And then there's lore that there are just incorporeal entities, spirits, or whatever you want to say, that
Mm-hmm.
that have never been a physical human or a physical animal that can
Right.
take on various appearances. And so
Yes.
technically all of those things are shifters, but there can be different categories. Not all
Yeah.
shifters are the same, I guess, is the answer.
Yes, I think that's very fair. And that tends to line up with my sort of logical approach. We hadn't specifically talked about it. Wanted your thoughts on that. Coming back to the we in terms of the research this week, we reviewed in particular a handful of stories in regards to Wendigo.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're in agreement. 2 out of 3.
Yeah.
Two of the stories seemed very solid in terms of what you and I tend to collect anecdotally in terms of reports. One of them, I'm personally convinced, was just pure fiction.
Yeah, I think it was a nice horror fan fiction. It was my perception.
Yes, and so we won't throw this particular story series under the bus by naming it. But of course, if you're searching for Wendigo stories online, it's not difficult to find.
Mm-hmm.
The one that really captured my attention in particular was the third one. I wanted to just discuss that a little bit because I'm curious if there's I think some similarities with bits and pieces of lore that we picked up here in the Ozarks. This one was in rural Pennsylvania, but the being involved was pretty eerie in the sense that it was mimicking the boy that it seemed to be stalking.
Yeah. And of course there are various lore about beings able to do that. So
and I found it very eerie, but then interesting, the idea that this unnatural figure used that the boy in who was telling the story, who had related the story, again, is a young boy.
Mm-hmm.
He and his dog had gone out into the wilderness,
Right.
near their home, as they did regularly.
Yeah.
And his dog, who is very much his faithful companion, encounters something in the underbrush or in the forest and not very far away, that he took as probably just some raccoons,
Mm-hmm.
squabbling amongst themselves or with the dog. The dog shows up and he's like, okay, we'll just head back to the house to preclude an issue.
Mm-hmm.
He gets back to the house, turns around, and from a far distance sees the forest line, and a figure, a very large, dark figure, emerges. And then this honestly gave me chills when I listened to it. That the figure mimics the boy calling his dog.
Yeah. Yeah. And that actually reminded me of a situation that I'm aware of, personally aware of, some friends that have land uh, not far from Sarcotsy, have had similar experiences there. And it tended to mimic my friend's mother-in-law most often. And often they would hear her voice calling her dog. And then they would go and basically it's a farm, and there's two houses, and so they lived in one, and then my friend's in-laws lived in the other, and so they worry and go check, and mom might be asleep or not even there, or car's gone, that kind of thing. And this has happened over several years, and enough times, and to the point that it has fooled various people thinking they're hearing, particularly the mother-in-law, but other family members as well, but often around calling the animals.
Very interesting and unsettling.
It is, and it's the area that it tends to happen in. It just has a feel that you always do feel like you're being watched.
Which obviously it's difficult to speculate based on that information.
Well,
yeah. There is the perhaps more benevolent conversational conjecture is it's curious, it's playful, it's fun. My mind tends to wander to it's a trap, don't follow it, don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's the horror movie trope, don't go out there.
No. And this is perhaps a positive point of conclusion, but the idea that over the many generations that so many people have experienced these moments where I can see pre-settlement, pre-white settlement, and then early white settlement, that the folks who were smart, when they encountered something like this, were able to intuit, we don't know what it is dangerous. You shrug and you watch your back, and you give it a wide berth.
Yeah.
And you understand that your book learning to that allows you to categorize all of the things and place them in their neat and tidy compartmentalized boxes is not going to work here. And so you shift your focus and the portions of your brain that you need to one of innate respect / survival, not not the academic naturalist perspective, but simply
Exactly. And
this is
and don't turn into the teenage horror movie. Go investigate. And
no, and perhaps the reality that there is a reality, that there is a beyond the veil, that you don't set up the Scooby trap and capture the monster and find out that it's Mr. Dibbles, the bank president.
yeah. It's on one hand, the Scooby-Doo lesson that the monsters are men often is true.
It is.
But is it always?
But is it always? And I think that realistically, we have to conclude by logic that no, it can't always be that, and it won't be.
Well, there's too many stories from too many places that are unresolved by that answer.
There really are, and I think that's powerful. And is at the end of the day, is very, very positive in the sense that if we lived in a world that was so small that we understood everything, it would be a very small world indeed.
It would, and it would be boring and dull.
Yes, it would, and that's no fun.
No, it's not. And maybe that's where we end it tonight.
I think that's good. This is a fun topic. I love this.
It is, and there's more that we'll delve into it some other time. But yeah, I enjoyed this.
Absolutely, I did too. Hope you all did as well. And questions, comments, or things that you'd like us to discuss or do research on, please do not hesitate to reach out.
Yes, and then we'll be back next week.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Cam.